Hello there, here is Mateus from Telegy Studio, and throughout this series, I'm going to teach you how to create a robot since the very beginning from modeling to animation and rendering. So without further ado, let's begin. So this here is Blender. So I imagine you've downloaded it, and that's basically what you're gonna have. You're not going to have some recent files here, but the general idea is the same. To start, the only thing that we need to do is to click outside from this splash screen. And then we have Blender. Alright, but before we move around, we do stuff, let's set up Blender so we can actually be able to move around, to select things, and to move in a more efficient way. So I'm going to click here on this Edit, Preferences, and then I'm going to Input. So Input is the first place that we are going to make some changes if needed. For example, if you have the numpad, you don't need to change anything. But if you don't have a numpad, you can opt to emulate it. So you can opt to emulate the numpad, clicking on this button right here. So the main 1 to 0 keys, they are going to be acting just like your numpad. That's basically it. Most people don't use it even though they don't have the numpad, because there are other ways to move around, to change camera and stuff like that we are going to see in some other videos. And another one, we have the emulate 3-button mouse. This is in the case that you don't have the middle mouse button, or for example, in some cases, if you're using a pen tablet, you might want to use this here. It makes things a little bit easier to move around with the pen tablet. But if that's not your case, you don't need to click it. And if you want to use this emulate 3-button mouse, you're gonna need to remember to press Alt and the left key to be working as your middle mouse button. Alright, so going to the next one is the navigation. In the navigation, I changed some stuff here because this is how I like to move in Blender. First of all is this auto perspective. For you, it might be, actually, it most likely will be on by default. And this is basically when we rotate the camera, it automatically goes to perspective view. I don't like this, so I turn it off. And then there is this depth here. It uses a little bit of the depth under your mouse, so it can make your movements a little bit better. So I like to keep it on. Another thing that I like to keep on is this zoom to mouse position. So where my mouse cursor is actually where I'm going to be zooming in or zooming out. Alright, and for the last one, we have here the key map. So clicking here on the key map, we have a bunch of options. This is where you can change, for example, if you want to select with the right click, you can change it here, but we are going to use the defaults of Blender, so we are not going to change any of these up here. We are going to actually change some things here below, which is this tab 4-by menu. So instead of pressing tab and changing modes automatically, this is going to open a pie menu where we can choose a bunch of other modes. So I prefer to use the tab 4-by menu because after you get used to it, it's really fast. So next one that I like to change is this extra shading pie menu. So I can change the overlays using the Z shortcut. And that's basically it. So now that we've made some changes, the thing that we need to do is click right here and then save preferences. Okay, so now that the preferences are saved, we can click in and close this window. And then we can start moving around in Blender. So to start, to rotate around, basically, we are just going to click on the middle mouse button and drag. So click and drag, and then we rotate around stuff. Again, if you're not using the middle mouse button, you're using the emulate middle mouse button, you are going to press Alt and then left click and move around. It doesn't work for me because I'm not emulating it. So that's basically how you rotate around your objects, let's say. Another way to do the same thing is go in here to this widget right here. So top right, click on it and drag, and then you're going to be able to rotate around your scene as well. All right, next one is going to be the zoom. So zooming, if you have the middle mouse button, you can rotate your mouse wheel and then you can zoom in and zoom out just like so. Another way to do this is pressing the middle mouse button with Control. So Control first, middle mouse button, and drag up and down. You're going to zoom in and out. Another way to do the same thing is going to this widget here. So click and drag in and out. There you go. Now the last one for our complete navigation, we are going to need to pan around. And to do that, we are going to press Shift first, middle mouse button, and then move around. So like this, we drag it, and then we can move it like this. In the case of people that are emulating it, you will have to do all these things, but also pressing Alt. So for example, if you want to zoom in, it's going to be Alt and Control and left click. If you want to pan around, it's Alt, Shift, left click. If you want to rotate, normally Alt, left click. That's it. All right. So another thing, if you want to pan, we have this widget right here, move the view. So click and drag, and we can move like this. All right. Now we can rotate around, we move the camera, and we can zoom in, zoom out. We now need to select stuff. So to do something with objects, we need to select those objects. And to do it is pretty simple. If you didn't change your defaults, you just need to left click on the item that you want to select. So here I selected the camera, select the cube, I selected the light. But this is not the only way that we have to select items. We can also come here to the outliner. So this place here is called outliner. I can click on the camera, for example, and then it updates the view here. So click on the cube, updates, click on the light, and then it's also selected here. Another way that we have to select is to click and drag. So we have this box select type of thing. This is basically because we have this tool here set. So we can click and drag, and this is the way that we are going to select things. We can change the selection mode here by pressing W. So we have all the modes to select stuff. This is, for example, this one is the circle select. This is like a brush. So I'm going to paint around like this. So if you click and drag and paint over your objects, you're going to select them. If you press W again, we have the lasso select. So like this, I can select everyone, and W again, I have a single select. So I select what I click. That's basically it. If I press W again, it goes back to the box select mode. All right. So now we have some objects here in the scene that we don't want. Let's say, for example, I don't want this light, I don't want this camera. To basically get rid of them, we need to delete them. And to do that is pretty simple. We press the delete key. Yeah, but pressing the delete key, we have no prompts, no nothing to confirm that we actually want to delete it. So there is another way to delete stuff, which is we click on, for example, here on the light, and I'm going to press X to delete this time. This way, we are going to be prompted with a OK kind of a dialogue, and then if we click on the delete, then it's actually going to be deleted. This is actually intentional. The devs in Blender, they made it so that when you press the delete, the key is pretty far, so you're not going to press it by mistake. So you actually want to delete that stuff. But if you press X, X is pretty close to where your hand normally stays. So they made it in a way that it needs confirmation that you actually want to delete stuff. Okay, but we deleted some stuff, and let's say that we deleted it by mistake. So if we want to get it back, we press Ctrl Z, just like in any other programs. And if you want, let's say that you pressed too much Ctrl Z's, you can press Ctrl Shift Z to go forward in time. And that's basically it. Now we need to transform our objects. So I have this cube here, but I want to move it around. I want to rotate it. I want to scale it. And to do that, first, we are going to learn how to make it with these widgets right here. So I'm going to click first on this move here. We are going to see that there is a new widget that appears, and it has some arrows, and these arrows, if we click and drag them, we are able to move the object. So here I moved it on this green, here I can move it on the blue, and here I can move it on the red. These colors, they represent axes. So for example, we have here the x-axis is red, the y-axis is green, and the z-axis is blue. So that's basically how you know what axis you're working with. And okay, so here I'm moving it in a single direction. I'm moving here in a single direction, but if I want to move it in all directions, I can click here on the middle of this widget, and I'm able to move it around freely. If I want to constrain it in the way that I can move on the Y and the Z at the same time, I'm going to click here on this plane. So I am not going to move on the X, for example. So we see these colors. This one here, for example, is red. So it means these planes, it means that if we move around these guys here, we are not going to move around the actual color. So I'm moving the red here, and then I'm not moving around the red. I'm not moving through the red, actually. Here, same thing. Blue, I'm not going to move on the blue. And here, I'm not going to move on the green. I'm going to move on all the others but the green. So that's basically it. And one way to reset these transforms, let's say we moved it around like that and all stuff, we can get it back to its original position in object mode. Remember that we are in object mode right here. So one way that we can do it is press Alt and G. Because to move it without the widget, we can move it with the letter G, but we are going to see it later. So Alt G is to reset it to the original position. Okay, so next one is the rotation. So click in the rotation, and we have somewhat a similar widget. So this one, we have the red for X. So if I grab it, I'm going to rotate on the X axis. Right click, I cancel the transform. So if I am rotating and I press right click while transforming, it goes back to where it was before the transformation. So here, green to move around the Y, and blue to move around the Z axis. This white one is going to move around the camera axis. So if I am seeing it like this, if I rotate it, it's going to rotate it like this. If I'm rotating it from this side here, for example, it's going to rotate in a different manner. And there is another way that we can move things, is basically to move freely. We click on where there is no kinds of curves, and so we click here, for example, and rotate it. We can rotate it freely like this. So right click, it goes back to the place where it was before. If we want to rotate it back to its original position, Alt R. Okay, and next one is going to be the scale. So I'm going to click here on the scale, and then we have another widget that's similar this time to the move. So we have here something to scale on the Y, to scale on the Z, and to scale on the X. And we also have those planes that we had on the move. So here, red, so it means I'm not going to scale on the red. So if I grab it, not scaling on the red. If I grab this one, I'm not scaling on the green. And if I grab this one, I'm not scale on the blue. If I want to scale everything together, I'm going to the middle of it, click and drag. So this way we are able to scale it up and down. Pretty difficult actually to scale it down, since it's fairly small where the center is. And that's one of the reasons why I like to use the shortcuts in Blender. And that's what we are going to do right now. We are going to learn how to use the shortcuts, because that's basically what I'm going to use throughout this course. Now I'm going to press W. So I go back to the select box, because we don't need these widgets anymore. We're going to use shortcuts. So for example, to move, we use the shortcut G to grab. That's basically it. So when we press G, the object gets bound to the cursor. So we can move it around like this. If I want to constrain it to some axis, I press the X axis. I can, in this case, so if I want to move it like this, so X, and then it's constrained to the X axis, Y constrained to the Y, and Z constrained to the Z. And the same way that we had before, we had those planes. If I don't want to move in a single axis, I can press, for example, I don't want to move on the Z axis. So I press Shift Z, and then I constrain it on the X and Y only. I'm not going to move on the Z. If I don't want to move on the Y, Shift Y, and then I'm not going to move on the Y. And if I want constraint in a way that I'm not going to move on the X, Shift X, and that's it. So I don't move on the X. Right click, I go back to the position where I was before. Now for rotation, the shortcut is R for rotate. So if I press R like this, I'm going to rotate aligned to the view. So it matters where you're looking. So if I'm looking like this, I press R, I'm going to rotate different from when I rotate it through here, for example. But we can also constrain it. So I can press R, X, I rotate on the X, Y, rotate on the Y, and Z, I rotate on the Z axis. If I want to rotate it freely, like we had before, I press R and R again. And then I rotate it like this. All right, right click, I go back to how it was before the transformation. All right, and the last one is going to be the scale. So I'm not going to use the widget. So to do the same thing that we do here, let's go back here. I'm going to press the letter S for scale. So I can scale up, I can scale it down like this. So it's easier to scale it using the shortcut. And the same thing, just like the others, if I press S, I can constrain it on the axis. So Y, X, Z, and then the shift to constrain it on the XY, for example, Shift Z, Shift X, and Shift Y. Right click, and I go back to how it was before. All right, But now that we already know how to move, rotate, scale, and things like that, we want to know how to add some new stuff on the scene. Because at the moment we have a cube and a cube only. So I want to add some other things. Then I'm going to move this cube around, and then I'm going to press Shift A. Shift A for add. So in here we have a lot of different types of objects that we are able to add to the scene. But basically here we are going to see mesh first. So in mesh we have a bunch of objects that we can choose from, and I'm going to choose here the monkey. So clicking on the monkey, I see here that it added a new object to the scene, and this is called Suzanne. So this one is like a mascot for Blender. So it's pretty normal to see it all around Blender stuff. Okay, so we added here this model. And if I want to add another model, I can, for example, I can move this one around, Shift A, and now I want a sphere. And I can move this one, Shift A, and then add a cylinder, for example. And so on and so forth. So, but the main problem here is, every time that I add a new object, they always end up in the middle. So they get stacked on top of each other like this if we don't move it around. This might be what you want, but in some cases this is not. So we can change it, we can change this behavior by changing where the 3D cursor is. First, 3D cursor is something that I think only Blender has, and this is very useful in a bunch of cases. And one of the cases is exactly to be dictating where the new models are going to be placed at. And for example, here we have this little thing like a dashed line with red and white. Let me actually grab these guys here and delete. So it's easier to see. Okay, so we have this dashed line like red and white thing. This here is the 3D cursor. And the new models, they are going to be placed exactly where this guy is. So if I want to place it in another place, I want to get this 3D cursor in also in another place. And to do that, we can click here on a tool of the 3D cursor, and where I click is where the 3D cursor is going to be. Alright, so now that I have the 3D cursor in another place, I can press Shift A, for example, and add a cube, another cube. And we can see that the cube is going to be placed where the 3D cursor is. But then we cannot select things anymore, like this. So the 3D cursor widget and the 3D cursor tool is interesting to move it around and stuff like that, but it affects the way that you select stuff as well. So for that, there is another way to change the 3D cursor position. And then let's go back here to the select box tool. To do that, it's pretty simple. We are going to press Shift and right click. So when we press Shift and right click, we place the 3D cursor where we clicked. So this is another way that we can use to change the 3D cursor position. But then we have the 3D cursor moved and all that, okay. But sometimes we do it by mistake. The 3D cursor is in a place where it shouldn't be. Oh, actually, it should be in the middle, but I got it to another place. I want to get it back to the middle. So to get it back to the exact middle, which is pretty difficult because it's 0 on the X, 0 on the Y, and 0 on the Z. So if you want to get it precisely like that, you cannot do it by hand. So you need to do it in another way. And to do it, you can press Shift C. So pressing Shift C, two things are going to happen. First, we are going to focus on all the models, all the objects that are on the scene. And the other thing that's going to happen is the 3D cursor is going to be placed on the center, on the origin of the world. But In some cases, let's say I want to see it like, oh, actually, let me change the 3D cursor position. I want to keep the camera in this position. I don't want to zoom it in or zoom it out. I want to keep it exactly like this. And I still want to get the 3D cursor to be on the origin, on the center of the world. In this case, we can press Shift S. And then we are going to have this pie menu here. And in this pie menu, we have a lot of options, but the one that we are going to use here to get the 3D cursor to its place is Cursor to World Origin. So if I click on it, we have Snap Cursor to World Origin. So this is basically the way that we get the 3D cursor back in position. So that's basically for this video. In the next one, we are going to start modeling. So I will see you there.